Welcome to lesson number 6. This is the final lesson pair, 6 and 7 together, for the activities associated with Woodturning 101. In this, we are going to do an activity that starts on page 37 of the book. It's a bud vase. Looks pretty simple. But what we're going to be doing on that bud vase is use all the tools that we've had. We're going to do all the measurement techniques that we've demonstrated. And we use even the Jacob chuck and drill. And I'm going to show you a better way of using the 4-jaw scroll chuck to mount and hold a larger piece of wood. So first thing I did was to try to select a piece of wood appropriate for the project. So I went to the back of the manual and found the size and shape. This is roughly the size and shape, but the difficulty is the grain in this piece of wood is going this way. And I want something whose has its fibers running the length of the wood, the length of the lathe. So that's no good. So I went and cut out a piece of walnut. It's a little oversized, but the grain is running right. It's tight, there's no cracks, and we're going to use it. So one of the first things I need to do is to get it up between centers and turn it around. And then we're going to mount it in the 4-jaw scroll chuck. Well, you've seen me use the center finder to mark the exact center, and I'm going to show you a couple other ways to do that also. I could just take a straight edge and connect the corners with a line. And that finds the center. With experience, you can eliminate the tools altogether. If I hold the pencil tight in my hand and draw it along all 4 sides without moving anything, I have again, well, I didn't get quite to the center, but I subscribed a little box. Inside that box is the center. So with the practice and experience, there's other ways to find and mark the center. So we have that center found. Next thing I'm going to do again is always punch the exact center. Makes it so much easier for me to find it on the lathe. So I go to the X on this side and mark it. So I've got that. I've used my taper cleaner and cleaned out the taper. I'm going to use a 4-prong spur drive and a headstock. And I'm going to use the standard live center, the tailstock, which I've also cleaned. So I'm going to put this up between centers on the dimple. Get over close, lock it down, and crank into the other dimple, which is right there. Tailstock is tightly locked. And I'm going to keep tightening until when I turn the hand wheel, the wood turns with it. And that means that the spurs have bit in strongly. And as yet, because this is really hard wood, just beginning to bite in. Pretty good, much better. Wow, nice and tight. So in order to keep this from unwinding, I will tighten and lock the quill lock. So first thing, turn it around. So I'm going to set my tool rest about 1/4 inch. Looks pretty clear, pretty straight. First tool to use, of course, is our spindle roughing gouge. And I have gone to the sharpener and sharpened every tool in this set right before we turn the cameras on. Now, this is the biggest piece of wood we've had on the lathe so far. Now, I know that looks a little scary, but if we turned a big square piece of wood fairly slow, the wood would hit this edge, drop into the blank between the corners, hit the next one hard, air, wood, and we would end up having a pretty bouncy kind of thing. So I want to be sure that we're at around 1500 RPM. I have preset that. And I am now going to rough this out in a normal manner. I don't know if you can hear it, but for me, I could hear the pitch of the wood beginning to change as it started to cut into this. I think what we have here is a little bit of camphor wood. I thought it was walnut, but now that I've begun to cut it, I know it's camphor. So we'll continue to rough this out until it's round. This is a good place for the speed to be speeded up, and we'll get this thing done in a few seconds. I'm stopping because as I've cut these corners back, my tool rest now is almost an inch away from the wood. That's too far. I need to bring that back in again. So I'm going to come over a little closer, again check my rotation. I felt like I was a little uncomfortable, so I raised the tool rest just a bit. I think that'll be better. I'm going to do the other end now for a little bit. Not round. Right there. That's round. Nope, almost. I thought it was. We're there. So we have a round piece of wood. I notice there's a little bit of a problem here, a little shallow crack. I'm going to watch that carefully. That'll be on the chucked end of the piece, so we'll be watching that very closely. Now the diameter of the piece we need is about 2 3/4 inches. So let's see how big it is, just to see how much more I have to take down. So I'm going to use my calipers, and I've just lightly slipped them over the wood, and then I'll know how big this is. Okay, it's that big, and that tells me when I lay it against my scale, I need 2 3/4, and I get about 3.5. So I'm going to take this down closer to the dimension that I need before I proceed any farther. There's no point in not doing that right now. So let me take some more wood off, and we'll get this into size and shape. Because I'm having a lot more turning to do, this is a good opportunity to practice slow, steady, smooth cuts that keeps the diameter uniform, less ripples. That means moving your tool steady. get that smooth, steady cut, I'm locking the tool, I'm moving my body, and the index finger holding the tool is resting against the back side of the tool rest. It's a long, straight line, which allows the tool to continue to move in a straight plane. I've got more to take off yet. So I've just discovered, if I push the tool this direction, I found it a little bit more difficult to cut than by pulling the tool this direction and putting my body ahead of the cut. They both work, but for me, it seems pulling it across here was more effective. You could maybe see it jump a little bit when I was doing that. Now a little bit more off. I think you also noticed that once I had raised the tool to the point that I found where the bevel was, that the amount of motion I had to make for each cut varied very, very little. Well, I'm not down to size yet, but I have taken off about a ½ inch. So let's see where we are just for the fun of it right now. We're about there. And that turns out to be right at 3 inches. And my drawing says I need it to be 2 3/4, so that's almost the right diameter. So I'm going to stop there and do the rest of the work. So what do I need to do? I need to put a tenon on one end because this is going to go into the 4-jaw scroll chuck and then be retrued. And then the second thing I need to do is transfer some dimensions to it. So let's get the scroll chuck set up first. Here's our 4-jaw scroll chuck that we've talked about. Now I know there's different models and they work slightly differently, but the concept is the same. I need to make a tenon on this end that's going to go down in here. It is not going to touch this bottom. The reference surface is up here. It has to rest here, not touch that, and be approximately that diameter. So I need to know depth, diameter, and because this is a square jaw, that corner has to be dead square. Other jaws require a dovetail, in which case we would shape the edge of the tenon to fit that. So let's keep this here for a second. Take my calipers, and let's decide how big around this needs to be. About that big. So let me lock that. Take my pencil, and I'm going to transfer that to the end of the wood. A little mark there. And now I'll put my pencil on it and just rotate the blank. And now I know its diameter. How deep does it need to be? Well, that's going all the way to the bottom, so that's too deep. That's too deep. So if I lay that out here, and put a mark at that depth, I'm going to come in maybe about 1/8 from there. So that's the depth I want for the tenon. And I'm going to transfer that mark all the way around. So now, Don't need to do that, but I wanted to illustrate something. Everything that's penciled from here to here needs to go away. So when I get down to this mark, the diameter will be right. When I get down to this mark, the depth will be right. And so I'm going to remove wood, and then I'm going to come back and then square things up and get it perfectly shaped. So this is not the tool for that job. I can't take it down with my parting tool, which I probably will do, roughly. Parting cut. Down to the mark, now this way. A little bit more, just a bit more. So I have it roughed out. I'm going to take my scale and set it here. I'm using this square corner to see if this corner from here to here is perfectly square. In fact, it looks doggone good, but let's assume it's not. I'm going to take my skew chisel and come straight in like this, down to that little corner in the bottom, to make sure there's no little rounded area like that. And then I want to make sure this plane here is smooth, so I'm going to rotate the skew over, using it again like a scraper. And it wasn't exact. I had to kind of square it up a little bit. Now the bottom out here is wobbly, but it's not going to touch anything. It doesn't matter. So now I have this prepared to put it into the 4-jaw scroll chuck, and I've done my first process of almost all spindle work. Roughing it between centers to get it round, making a possible tenon for one end if that's the way we're going to mount it. In this case it is. So I'm ready to take it off of these jaws, mount my 4-jaw scroll chuck. I'm going to call it chuck from now on. Hard for me to say anymore. Okay, off it comes. Out comes the drives. I'm going to leave this one in for a minute. Tap this out. And I'm going to mount my 4-jaw scroll chuck. Remember when we mount it, we get it down close, slam it on for the last quarter turn. Now the reason I'm leaving this in, I don't need that anymore. Take my calipers out of the way and find my chuck key buried in the sawdust. I'm going to set it in here loosely. I'm going to bring my tailstock up and I'm going to put it right back into that little hole. The hole that was aligned before. Now I have my hands free to push this in tight against the jaws. And I'm looking at the bottom, and I see that the tenon is not touching the base of my jaws, which is exactly what I want. So I'll tighten. One hole, second hole. And as long as I can keep tightening, the fingers are beginning to bite into the wood and crush those fibers, making a better hold. And that's as far as I can go, so that's it. So now we're back between centers. This is wobbly down here, I can see that. I'm going to lock this tailstock back into place again. And we are back between centers, but in the 4-jaw scroll chuck. And because I've moved the wood, it may not be running perfectly true. So one more pass on here just to be sure that it's true to the chuck. Checking it out, toward the tailstock, I feel the very slightest amount of wobble. One cut ought to do this. So we're back to true again. So now we have a billet. It's in the chuck, it's between centers, it's ready to begin to cut shaping. So here is the point of today's lesson, one of the major points. We do this class a lot, and we do this particular exercise. And many times we end up with shapes that are totally unlike the one in the drawing. The objective of the lesson is to transfer the dimensions from the drawing to the piece of wood and turn that specific shape. It's not about making a bud vase, it's about dimension transfer. If you're turning for furniture and you're going to make 4 legs for a chair, you would like them all to look alike, which means you have to be able to do these activities. So this is a simple version of furniture turning in a way. So let's go look at the drawing on the wall here and see where we're going. This is the drawing I took out of the book. It says that the bud vase, well, let's see, some dimensions are taken from the front, some are from the tail, and I'm going to have to transfer all those dimensions to the piece of wood. So I know that the diameter of the neck is going to be 2.5 inches. 1.5 inches down from there, I go to my narrowest diameter of 1.25 inches, which is the neck. 3.25 inches further down, I go to my largest diameter, which is 2 3/4 diameter. And another 2 inches down is the end of my piece. So I've got to get that information transferred onto that piece of wood. So when I get the dimensions transferred, this is what it's going to look like. On the end, this 2.5 inch diameter, I'm going to just transfer a pencil line. And then coming down 1.5 inches, I'm going to use my parting tool and my scale to part down to that 1.25 inch diameter I need. And then I'll come down to 3.5 inches and I'll part down to the largest dimension. Now there's a cut at the bottom I'm not going to make. I'm going to maybe put a little bit in there. I don't want to cut this down because I want all the support I possibly can get for as long as possible. So I'm going to just put a little mark there. We'll complete this much later. So this is about laying out. Now remember, in using our calipers and our parting tool, we need to do a number of different things. We're going to need to transfer the dimensions from a scale. The end is 2.5 inches in diameter, so I'm going to crank this down to 2.5. One end is against the end of the scale, the other one is on the 2.5 mark. I'm going to leave it just a very small amount proud, purpose of which is I recognize that I'm going to have sanding to do later, and I'm going to take off a little bit of more wood at that point. So let's take my pencil, come to the end here, and by eye, I'm identifying the 2 3/4. And I'll transfer that mark around like we did for the chuck. Next dimension down is 1.5 inches down. So I'm going to come down 1.5 inches. And I know that my mark is going to be put there. The next dimension down is another 3.5 inches. 1, 2, 3.5. Right there. There's 3.5. And now I'm going to come down another 2 inches to the base. And that's where my next dimension is going to go. So I know where the pieces are going to get marked. Now, this diameter should be 1.25 inches. Back to my scale and my calipers. Inch. Coming down, coming down. 1.5 inches, climbing. Okay, so that's how small this neck is going to be. Now, remember in our parting cuts, we take 2 overlapping cuts. So I need to come down a lot. A little bit, overlap. know how close I am, but let's stop and check. Oh, I got a bunch to go. Overlap. Because we've rounded these points off, I can lightly do that. Getting close. Remember, we can also do this. The calipers were just lightly resting on the wood until they slip over. Done. Next dimension is 2 3/4. And that's going to be at this line. Well, that's too wide. 1, 2. And 3/4 plus a smidge. I wish this was smell-o-vision. I'm working with camphor, and you get no information at all. So before I take this measurement right here, I'm going to stop and check out a few things and be right back. Okay, we're back. I'm getting ready to turn this one down to dimension here. That's the fattest portion, and the diameter there needs to go to 2 3/4 inch. So I've set my calipers at 2 3/4, and I'm now going to turn this one down. Overlap. Now, not much coming off here. In fact, I'm there. Good. Now, the base, just so I know where it is, I'm going to put a small cut here. I don't intend to take much wood off. This is to let me know where I'm going to stop. Last one is to turn this down to dimension, and I'm going to look at my pencil line on the end. So, we have the dimensions here, 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 length. Everything is laid out, ready to turn. We've exposed you to transferring dimensions, cutting them in, mounting things in the chuck. So this is the end of part 1. And what we're going to do now is we're going to give you a chance to go take a piece of wood, put it on your lathe, take these dimensions. It's in the video. You can see them. It's also in the book. If you have the book, you'll find that listed right with that project, and you can get those dimensions. Get a piece of wood, get it in the chuck, get it turned down to dimensions. And I'll see you in the next half of this lesson where we turn down the shape and put appropriate hole in the center. Where are we going? Just went back and pulled this off the shelf. There's one of our bud vases. Looks like it's got a really nice deep hole in there, but it all is just a drilled hole with this edge flared out, which we will do next lesson. See you in part 2.